I spend a lot of time talking about the best ways to build. It's kind of my whole thing. I'm really nerdy about the details of how we architect software. But things have changed, and how we build matters less in a lot of ways. What still matters, and arguably always has, is what we're building. Deciding on good projects to work on is hard, and I know a lot of people are scared that if they pick the wrong thing, they're just wasting their time and energy. I've always loved giving advice on how to avoid this, and I usually focus on one specific thing: solve problems that you actually have. When you start solving those problems, you'll find more, and then the rabbit hole continues until eventually you find something actually really useful. And that's how I have managed to build such cool things throughout my career. I start with one problem, and then I find another, and then I find another, and I keep yak shaving until eventually I've built something kind of cool. But in a world where ideas suddenly matter a little bit more, getting them right might seem even scarier than it did in the past. And I've read my comment section. I know how many devs are struggling to figure out what they should be building right now. I have good news for you guys. I have a list. I have been keeping a list of ideas that I wished somebody would build for a long time. And as much as I want to build them myself, I have to be realistic. I do not have the time. As powerful as agents are, they make any one of these projects viable for me. They don't make all of them viable for me. And I wanted to share some of these ideas because ideas are still cheap. I don't think I'm special for having a whole bunch of ideas. I don't really think I'm that special in general. I just like building shit. The point of this is that I've seen what you guys do when you're given ideas. I watched the chaos that unfolded when I mentioned how much I like Neri and how I want a environment like that to use for coding on my Mac. I've seen all of the insane things you guys are capable of building when given hints of the types of stuff that I wish existed. So I'm going to stop giving hints. I'm just going to give you all of it. I have all the ideas written down, but hidden behind this green wall. And to give you a taste of what I have in mind here, the first idea is better NPM. I have so much to say about all of these ideas, and maybe, just maybe, one of these will become an awesome product some of y'all can build. But in order for me to justify giving all of this away for free, I need to make a little bit of money off someone else's good idea, which I'm going to do with a quick break for today's sponsor. Here's a hot take you might not expect from me. I think it's important that you continue to read your code, especially if you have agents writing it. But let's be realistic here. No one's reading a PR like this. 11,000 lines added? Come on. AI is resulting in way more of these big PRs, and sure, the AI can review it, but you need to know what's going on. Finding the things that matter in a pile of slop like this is nearly impossible. At the very least, this PR was reviewed already by CodeRabbit. Wait, what's that button? Review change stack. I've been waiting for this for so long. I've been complaining forever about how unreadable these giant PRs are and how stupid it is that we get the code in an alphabetically listed order. It makes no sense whatsoever. We've been dealing with this for years for no reason, and now CodeRabbit solved it. They break your PRs up into layers that prioritize the things that actually matter to make it way easier to read through what happened. You can mark sections as viewed as you go, which makes it way easier to track what you've actually looked at. There's even a mini map on the right side that shows you where different parts that matter are and describes them, which makes it so much easier to look through this type of work. And it's honestly just so nice to hover over the different things a PR did and get a summary of what's actually going on. Honestly, pretty much anything is better than GitHub's code review platform, but this is night and day difference. Read more code with less pain at soydev.link/CodeRabbit. We need to talk about better NPM, and also specifically better NPX, because I have so many thoughts here. NPM has problems. It is also an incredible piece of software, and I'm very thankful it exists. We should talk a bit about the problems with NPM. I'm going to go through this a little fast because remember, we have a lot of other ideas to go through as well. Obviously, one of the biggest right now that we are seeing every day is security. NPM by nature is going to be a big target for hackers and malicious actors. And every time they find a new way to exploit NPM, it becomes harder for good-intentioned, good-faith devs to use it as well. Every additional layer they put in makes life harder for us as devs. And I have been fighting so much to get packages added to NPM recently. It's regularly becoming the hardest part of the projects and the products that I'm building. That's kind of the other issue if we're being real here. Publishing is too hard. And it also has a lot of negative consequences if you get it wrong. For example, if you accidentally publish the wrong version number, you're never taking that down. That's out there forever. And even some really big package maintainers that have accidentally typoed a number on a version release, for example, something like Tanstack Query, has screwed this up. And now React Query's latest version is just not what it's supposed to be. and they are not able to revoke that publication because NPM is so paranoid about an old app that had specific dependencies not being able to be rebuilt because some of those dependencies vanished years later. These are all absolutely solvable problems. It's just that changing them right now with the way NPM works today would come with a lot of risks and potentially damage the ecosystem and the things we rely on. Just a handful of some things I would like to see in a new NPM platform. First off, it'd be really cool for revoking releases at a threshold. For example, if my package has been installed under 100 times or it's been up for under 5 hours, I should be able to revoke it, obviously. Similarly, due to the nature of these more malicious things that are being published, I should be able to pay to audit every release. Why can't I put in an API key for Anthropic or put in a credit card number in NPM so that they will audit and compare the diffs of every release and give their vibe check as to whether or not that release is safe or intended? On that note, we need way more visibility on what the packages do. Not just like what permissions they need, but things like, is this an obfuscated package or is this deobfuscated? Is this readable JavaScript or not? Is it open source or not? Is it backed by people we know who published the last release? There should be more metadata associated with given packages, both in like the NPM site when you view it, but also in your own CLI when you install it. Let's say somebody published a malicious package on NPM named, I don't know, is odd with a 0 instead of an O. There's, of course, the real is odd package, which you also shouldn't install. But the fact that it would be possible for somebody to make an is odd with the 0, that is a truly at its core malicious package that like reads your file system, that accesses your network, that does a bunch of sketchy shit it shouldn't. And you would not see anything different installing that than you would see installing this, is a fundamental design failure in NPM itself. Different packages that have different needs and different complexity come with different risk. And that risk should be upfront to you when you decide what you're doing. And on that note, people are already noticing something. Name squatting should be killed. There should be a person or a series of agents that will verify submissions requesting names that exist to be handed over to them that does a good enough job vetting that you can actually deal with this stuff. Fun fact, the TanStack package on NPM isn't owned by Tanner. It's owned by some dirtbag who was squatting on it, trying to get Tanner to pay a whole bunch of money. And when Tanner refused, he sold it to some cringy company, 30 Tools. Might even be his company. I wouldn't recommend clicking the link. It's probably a scam. This should be illegal. And any real open source platform that knows a fucking thing about the ecosystem should hard ban this. But NPM is too busy. Shut the fuck up. They're useless. There's no excuse for how NPM is not doing their jobs lately. The name squad needs to be absolutely decimated. And on that note, I want to talk a bit about NPX, the executable part of NPM, because I would argue, potentially controversially, that this is actually the more fun entry point to rethink things here. If I build a random script or a tool that my agents need that's a part of their skills or whatever, distributing that code is annoying. It's really annoying. And I have a bunch of packages that I don't actually expect people to ever install, but they are very useful when you use them over NPX. The idea of NPX as a shared executable layer, similar to how the browser lets you go to different sites to do different things, NPX lets you use different code to solve different problems. I really like the idea of going further with NPX. What do I mean by this? Well, if you run NPX now on any given thing, let's say NPX slot slop, for example. Since I've already used this package, it doesn't have to confirm anything and it's good to go. But if I change this to like at latest or something, it asks for permission. It needs to install the following package. Is it okay to proceed? I have to choose yes or no. How the fuck do I know anything here? What info do I get here? This is so insultingly useless. There is nothing I can do here to get any info on if what I'm about to do is safe or not. Imagine it gave how big this app is. Imagine if it gave the author who most recently changed something. Imagine it gave a score for how likely it thinks it's safe or not. Imagine it gave you the permissions that it has when it runs. All I get is this random fucking version number. That's insane. This is such a useful thing. And not just for us as humans running these things, by the way, for our agents too. One of the real concerns we have now, and we should hold this concern because it's very, very real right now, is that if your agents have commands they can run in a skill MD, for example, there's a skill that says, here is a thing you can do, here's the command that you run, and the command is an NPX command, and then somebody maliciously takes over that package, your agent can entirely unknowingly execute malicious code. Imagine that this put out a little more info and your agent could read it and make a decision or highlight to you as the user, hey, I was supposed to run this command. I got a heads up, this might be an insecure thing. What do you want to do about it? And again, since the value of this is largely small open source scripts, imagine that you can pay a small amount of money to have these things audited so that a security score comes up when people run them. If you ship a small bit of open source code and you pay 50 cents for an agent to read it and give a rough idea of what likelihood it is to be good or bad, and that is run on a third party that is verified, because again, you can't just run this on your own computer because you can fake those results. A rough idea of how risky every install is would be so useful. It would be so useful. And it would make me want to use NPX way more. If you combine this with private registries where you can run a command to get access to a bunch of packages that I have in my environment that are not publicly released, but you're getting from me in my bucket, that would be so cool. Like if you and I could both have our own TanStack package or something that might be different for our use cases, if I could publish to my private registry, and now that is the default over the public registry, that'd be great. There's so many little things here. The idea of shareable software in the form of packages is incredible, but the architecture we have for it assumes that every single package was really expensive to make and has a maintainer that's willing to spend a lot of time dealing with NPM. That is stupid and wrong and really, really needs to be addressed. Doing this right requires a lot of pieces. You have to build the integrations for publishing. You have to build the place that they're published. You have to build the CDN where all of this code exists. You have to build the platform for verification. You have to build the registries. You have to build the CLIs. You have to build a lot of shit for this. But I think you can now. This is why I did the video about building bigger, because I want you guys to think this way. Rebuilding NPM made no sense before because it would be too expensive and probably wouldn't get users. Now it's a lot cheaper. Maybe go do it. One more note on this. There are already companies like Socket that figured out how to use AI to audit new releases and find these exploits when they happen. Socket figures out when NPM exploits happen before NPM themselves do. There is so much room to build better things on top of and instead of NPM. I hope more people take the opportunity. And that's just idea number one, guys. I know that one seems bold, so let's get to something a little more reasonable for the next one, like, I don't know, reinventing source control from scratch. I've been complaining about this one for a while. I don't think Git is the right abstraction for a lot of things. Git was so much better than all the source control we had before it that it became the standard, and it became a standard for a good reason. It is so much better than almost anything else that existed. But a lot has changed since Git was introduced. And both Git and GitHub feel like they're rotting at the core because the needs they were built for are very different from the needs we have today. This is going to sound like a really silly question, but hear me out. Why can't we commit .env files? Think about this. Think about it deeply. There's an obvious answer here, which is because then everybody who has access to the repo has access to all of your sensitive environment variables. But why? Well, the answer is because that's just how Git works. When something's in the repo, now everyone has access. And once it's in the repo once, it's in there forever. If you decide to open source later, those environment variables are there. If you hire and then fire somebody, they had those environment variables, and they probably still do because you probably had to give them the file anyways. When you let another team work on your project, even if they don't need the environment variables, if they're in the repo, that team has them. You could try to solve this in a gluey way by adding a service on top of your code base that just manages environment files and environment variables. And I know a lot of people are doing this. I know there's a lot of cool companies that have tried to build solutions there. But my argument is a bit different. The fact that all of these companies for managing secrets exist, even though in the end what it resolves to is just a fucking random file on your computer, shows that Git is failing us. This is just one of the ways in which Git is failing us right now. Why can't I have private files in my Git repo? Why can't I have some files that only certain people have access to and everyone else doesn't? Why can't I have a branch that is private? Why can't I have a pull request that is private until it merges? Or even better, why can't I delay when my merges go public or are seen by other people on the team? Why is there no concept of granular permissioning whatsoever on top of Git? There's a reason for that. The reason is because it was built for Linux. And none of that was necessary for the development of Linux. Now it kind of is necessary for Linux, though, because when there are critical bugs or safety and security issues in Linux and they get patched, everyone has agents running that read every patch and say, hey, is there anything in here that might have been a security fix? And now you're getting 0 days before they're even announced. Imagine if the Linux team could merge a security fix, cut a release, send it to all of the people who are maintaining Linux distributions that are vulnerable to the exploit, and get it all patched before the code itself is even public. Is that true open source? Probably not, but I don't fucking care anymore. We're in the middle of a security crisis, and we're bickering over where we should store files still. What the fuck went wrong? Sorry for the slight crash out. I'm just really mad these problems aren't solved and could kill open source in spirit if they're not fixed. We need ways to securely merge code and cut releases without all of that code being visible to the whole world. The idea of private and public being a repo level setting instead of a change level option is insane, and Git itself is built deeply around the assumption that the repo is what has permissions, not the contents of the repo. There have been lots of attempts to explore what this could look like, from DeltaDB over at Zed to the new Origin stuff Cursor just released, but most of it is trying to do stuff like add more context for the agents to have, or stuff like making it easier to clone the repo so multiple agents can work on it in parallel. None of them are trying to address the fundamental problems within Git. I actually made a thread about this a few weeks ago, and I'm going to read through it quick because I think it really showcases what I'm talking about here. I'm using my AI psychosis to fix clouds for agents. Someone else needs to use their psychosis to fix source control. I would do it myself, but I'm too deep on the cloud thing. GitHub is dying and Git is not the right primitive. I'll dump some thoughts here. First, I said open source should not always mean 100% of our code is public 100% of the time. How much energy do we have to put into preventing ENV leaks in source control? How many miserable ways have we reinvented sharing of those instead? How many projects would be open source if they could hide and fight PRs? I know, for example, Claude Code would be much more likely to be open source if they didn't have to show all of the things they were working on all of the time, because half the time it doesn't actually end up shipping, and people would have seen that and been annoyed. You want to hide the work that isn't done, and Git does not let you do that. How many security fixes are sitting unpublished because they will be exploited as soon as they appear in the tracker? How much better would life be if I could have a mono repo with some sub-packages that are private without having to split into multiple repos? Personally, I have had a lot of projects that I had to break up into multiple repos because I wanted to open source a bunch of them, but I couldn't open source the whole thing for various reasons. The fact that I have to shape the way I do work around what I want to share instead of using my tools to shape what is shared is just stupid. And it's silly that I fixate so much on this environment variable thing, but we have just become normalized to this as an obvious thing for no good fucking reason. It's just dumb, but it's how it works, so we accept it. Going a bit further here, I think commits are bad. I don't think they're terrible. I think they're a reasonable base unit, but they don't really work well the way that we're building today, and branches are even worse. I do really like how JJ does this. I am resisting the urge to go all in on JJ at this point because it doesn't solve the problems I care the most about, but the ones it does solve, it solves so well that it feels much better to use. JJ solved a lot of ergonomic issues with source control management for devs, and I love it for that. It's what got me thinking more deeply about what would it look like if we unfucked Git, and a lot of the pieces there are great. The idea of snapshots and tags instead of branches and commits is so strong. In a world where we're used to thinking of commits all the time and worrying about our history constantly, JJ was a breath of fresh air and showed that we're wasting so much of our time thinking about things that don't matter. On that note, work trees are atrocious. It is actually hilarious how bad work trees are. I had a cloned repo that was annoying to work with a few days ago because one of the work trees with an agent checked out main, and now I can't check out main in the actual main directory because one of the random work trees happened to have taken it hostage. Insanity. Holy shit, it's so bad. I really don't like work trees, the Git primitive, at all. And one last piece, this is where it starts to get even more controversial. I don't think source control should require real operating systems or file systems. The fact that you're expected to interface with Git via a CLI in a real environment with real files is stupid in a world where we have awesome tools like Just Bash. If you're not familiar with Just Bash, it is a full JavaScript or TypeScript layer that emulates Bash so that you can run an agent like a Claude Code or Codex type thing without having a real Linux kernel and a real file system. Instead, it can run entirely inside of memory, inside of JavaScript, and not know any better. It's a lot easier to clone shit randomly within memory than it is to move files around a whole bunch on your system. Slight tangent, but I want to vent about this because I really want this fixed and I don't know where else to complain. Nullvox Populi shared this benchmark with me earlier this year, and it has haunted me since. This is a benchmark on disk performance for tools like Git and PNPM across different platforms. He was replying this to a post I made about how fast the SSDs are on my M5 Mac. The SSD is super fast. I was really excited for like bulk reads and writes and shit on this machine. And then I looked at his benchmark. The way this benchmark works is you clone the project, which has a bunch of sub frameworks in it that are boilerplates that have a bunch of random shit installed. And the benchmark is cloning all of this, PNPM installing all of this from cache, and measuring how long it takes for the files to be created, because there is no network access being done here. Everything's already cached. It's just recreating the contents in the directories. And the results haunt me. With an old middle range AMD CPU and admittedly a lot of RAM, the clean install took 6.8 seconds on Ubuntu, to be clear, with a normal Western Digital SSD. On an M4 chip with the really fancy Apple SSD, the exact same thing took 31 seconds. This appears to be a massive problem with APFS, which is Apple's file system, where creating a lot of small files sucks, to the point where an M1 Ultra could take upwards of 140 seconds to do this. 140 seconds for a task that a similar MacBook running Ubuntu instead can do in 3 to 12 seconds. That's insane. That is actually insane. APFS is garbage. At the very least, it's garbage at these types of small file read writes, and all of these numbers show it. This type of thing just sucks. It's really bad, and it makes spinning up lots of small environments for your agents to work in, it is just bad. There is no excuse for it to be this bad. This means that crazy solutions like a RAM disk that are using other file system technologies actually make sense. Apparently, this is all F-Sync causing problems. I am not deep enough to know. I don't care. All I know is it sucks. And whenever I move to one of my Linux machines, cloning, installing, and all those things feels so much better than it does on a Mac right now. This is one of the many reasons I think we should be moving away from file systems. They're a rat's nest full of weird problems and assumptions that are platform specific, and something that works great on your Ubuntu machine might run like shit on a Mac just because they have some weird thing happening in the file system layer. Do you know what doesn't have these problems? Node isolates. If all of the content here just lived inside of memory, inside of something else, you don't have to worry about the weird implementation details of the file system on your fucking computer. Yeah, I'm annoyed about all this. I hope someday someone fixes the problems for macOS, but I'm done with file systems. I almost put file systems in this list. I know better. So instead I put Dropbox for devs, because I'm stupid. And it's basically what I had in mind anyways. I have a handful of different machines that I'm using for building with agents right now. I have my Mac Mini in my other room. I have another Mac Mini downstairs that's mostly just doing like home automation shit. I have a GMK Tech box that should actually be arriving today, so I could set up a similar thing on Ubuntu instead and not deal with macOS's bullshit, and also have a little bit more RAM. I have so much hell just managing the content of all of those machines. I can't tell you how many times I spun up a work tree and forgot to pull the latest main, and now it's building on a stale base. I can't tell you how many times I didn't have the right environment variables on one computer, but I did on another. I can't tell you how many times I didn't know where a project was on one machine because I architected my directory with all my code different than somewhere else. I do my best to clone things in the same places all of the time, but I don't always succeed. Do you know what I don't have this problem with? Dropbox. Because Dropbox is one structure that exists on all of my machines that use it. On my NAS that backs up all my Dropbox content, on my editor's computer that downloads all of the video content for it, and on my laptop where I do all my graphics work, the structure and the contents of all those folders is the same across all of them. But Theo, we already have Git. Well, you know how I feel about that. But more importantly, how do you manage your Git repos without making another Git repo and then dealing with submodule hell, which no one's actually going to deal with? Imagine you had your code folder, the folder where all your projects are on your computer, and then you go spin up your Mac Mini, and everything is there. It's all there the same way it was. Your environment variables can sync totally fine. You'll have to do some weird hacks around node modules because they're different on different OSs and whatnot. But imagine you could just have your code folder on all of your machines without actual effort. Nothing is built to do this right now, and you have to build a lot of pieces. I actually started with a project called FS2, meant to be File System 2. But even that wasn't going to go far enough for what I have in mind. My dream here would be that I have my code folder structured one specific way with all the different subfolders and whatnot. And then when I spin up an agent in the cloud or my Mac Mini or anything else, the contents are all there, or at the very least, the structure is there. And once you navigate to or try to explore or touch any of the files in a given section of it, it will pull that part down in the moment at that time. None of the existing solutions come close to what I have in mind here, which is let me use the stuff I'm already using, but take over this directory so new things will appear in it automatically without additional effort. Tavi in chat touched on like a rough piece of what I'm imagining here, which is imagine something like Google Drive or Dropbox having their own equivalent of a .gitignore. And Robert in chat here said, dude, I've been dreaming of exactly what I'm describing for so long, but you don't have the skills to make it yourself. Have you proven that to yourself yet? Have you proven that the cool models and agents and dev tools we have can't get you over the line here? Because what matters to build something like this isn't necessarily your capability or your knowledge. It's your token budget and your patience. If you're patient enough to go through the hard bars to do this right, Robert, you can absolutely do it. And I really hope multiple people in my audience go and try to do this. So what is next on my list? We're definitely going to ramp down a bit, right? Right? With a new mobile platform. This one hurts for me to even share, but I'm scared if we don't do this now, we'll never be able. A lot of people don't know this, but I used to be an Android fanboy. I was like the Android guy in my high school. I used to give people shit for using iPhones when I was a kid. Obviously, that has since changed. I got the sinful orange iPhone now, but I am what I am, and what I am is a person who likes good experiences on their devices, and I'm a person who uses their phone heavily enough and relies on it often enough. And having a phone that works and works well with all the applications I rely on is important. But there are things that I can't stop thinking about when I think about mobile. Things like Apple's inane, god-awful policies about what's allowed to be distributed and paid for on the App Store. The fact that I can use my credit card to order an Uber or a DoorDash, but I can't use it to buy a game unless I do it through Apple Pay, because Apple's arbitrarily restricted digital goods is something they get 30% of and has to go through their payment systems. The fact that they are banning all sorts of shit just because they don't like it. The fact that the newest Expo release isn't allowed on the App Store, and if you want it, you have to get it set up yourself manually with an account that you're paying $100 a year for, and then have to spend hours setting it up. Or here's a silly one that's one of my favorites. The info plist file that describes your application and its permissions needs to have the developer and the team in the file, which means your source control has one user's config hard-coded in it. It's insane. The developer experience for iOS is so horrible that I can't imagine anything worse until I try building an Android app. Android makes it a little easier to start building and get it on your phone. But the chaos of getting it actually distributed on the Play Store and the absurd opaque nature of when they decide to ban your shit. At least Apple gives you a admittedly bullshit reason why they're not letting you release. Google just arbitrarily says, nope, no release, and doesn't give you enough info to fix. Both of these are terrible. And I forget how bad it is until somebody on my team asks me for my home address so they can put it into the filing to get approval so they can start building the app again. It's so bad. I'm going to tell a real crazy anecdote here, and somebody touched on it in chat. I'm going to talk about CyanogenMod a bit. Most of you guys are probably too young to have any idea what CyanogenMod was. CyanogenMod was a custom build of Android. Android is the operating system on the majority of mobile phones, but it's also an open source OS and platform. And most phone manufacturers add a bunch of junk that most people probably wouldn't want. CyanogenMod was a community effort to make Android better. It was meant to be vanilla Android with a couple niceties and things like the ability to more easily overclock your system, change your status bar colors, get rid of bloatware, make your phone faster. You could even install custom modded kernels and shit. It was so fun. And I was really involved in CyanogenMod back in the day. And here is where I will drop my spiciest take about where mobile was when I was a kid. The reason I got so into CyanogenMod and customizing and writing code for the OS itself is because, as stupid as this is, customizing Android itself was easier than building an app. What the fuck? Imagine a world where it's easier to fork Chrome and build new features in it than it is to put up a website. Do you know how insane that would be? Can you fathom a world where building a browser and editing your browser is easier than getting something online? That was the case when I grew up on Android. If you had one of the phones that could be easily rooted or have its bootloader unlocked, or one of the ones that somebody discovered the right way to do that with, flashing a new OS was so easy, and building your own was relatively trivial. I remember the era where there were like 20 different flavors of custom Android ROMs being made by independent devs doing it for fun. Ready for a real trippy one? Very few people here have heard about Paranoid Android, I'm sure. Not the song by Radiohead, the custom ROM. Drop ones in chat if you ever heard about Paranoid Android before. More ones than I expected. Now drop a 2 in chat if you know the person who made it. I don't think any of you guys do, because this one blows me away every time I learn it. Paranoid Android was founded by Paul Henschel. Paul Henschel's also known as 0xCA0A, the creator of Poimanders, the creator of Zustand, the creator of React 3 Fiber, one of the best React community devs in the world, started with open source ROM hack design and development. I ran an operating system this guy created before I installed a package that he created. And here is my spiciest take. Paul would have become a mobile dev if mobile dev didn't fucking suck. I haven't talked with him about this in depth, but if he's anything like me, and having talked to him before, I'm pretty sure he is, he made Paranoid Android because he wanted to build things on his phone, and building apps sucked. Other ROMs pissed him off, so he built his own, and it went really well. And then he kept trying to build apps and other things, and it still sucked. And he found the web sucked less, so he went there instead. And Android lost one of the greatest developers I've ever met because the platform was too hard to build for. It was easier to rebuild the platform than it was to build apps for the platform. And now we have to do one more rabbit hole here. I promise this one's worth it. We need to talk about BlackBerry for a second. BlackBerry was the first winner of the smartphone wars, and it has since died hard and been bought by TCL, the panel company in China, in order to experiment with mobile screen development. The reason I want to talk about BlackBerry is BlackBerry 10. Fun fact, I worked at Staples as a salesperson and technician when the BlackBerry phones using BlackBerry 10 came out. And it was very hard to explain it to people because it was a BlackBerry. It ran their own proprietary BlackBerry OS, but it could also run Android apps. They had a complete Android runtime built in for running Android applications. This was a huge deal because it meant that the incredible ecosystem of apps that were available on Android would work on your BlackBerry, even though there wasn't much software available specifically for BlackBerry. You had BlackBerry's official apps, which were really good at the time, but you also had Android's ecosystem too. And that combo made it seem really enticing, but there were some problems here. First off, there just wasn't much reason to go with this instead of an Android phone, especially because the Android apps performed a bit worse. The CPUs available for phones weren't as good either, so the virtualization through their runtime was at higher cost than it would hypothetically be today if someone did something similar. And then there's just the fact that BlackBerry itself kind of sucked, and the software that they built was closed source and only ran on BlackBerry devices, and it didn't offer anything new. So why am I talking about BlackBerry now? Well, I'm talking about it because they proved you can build a different OS and still support Android apps. So the historic problem that existed in building a new mobile operating system, which is that you would lose the whole ecosystem. I'm not one to pretend Android apps are just as good as the iOS equivalents. Believe me, I know. I have a folding phone. I've experienced just how bad Android can get. But I still need a place to put apps. And the fact that it is so much work to even try to distribute an app other people can use is insane right now. And what I'm imagining, what I'm dreaming of, is a future where we do something similar to what we did in the Paranoid Android and CyanogenMod era, the peak of custom OSs, before we got to the era of Lineage OS, where we're just trying to maintain a good, minimal, private open fork. I want something experimental. I want something that works with Android and Android apps, but is something fundamentally different. Something that encourages people to build on the platform. Something that makes it easy to customize and experiment and build new apps that can do new things. Something that makes it easy for me to see something someone is demoing, scan a QR code, and have it on my device working. Something like NPM, but for mobile. But to do that, you need to go to the OS. And I think now might be the time to do that. In fact, I think now might be the last time to do that, as Android is getting more and more closed. What would it look like to have a mobile OS that encouraged you to develop on it, to customize it, to build whatever you want, both as a developer and as a user? Imagine a world where you had access to all the apps you rely on every day, but also a platform where you could build new things on top. Imagine an app ecosystem that encourages you to fork and modify within the apps themselves. An app ecosystem that doesn't block you from doing just-in-time compilation, that lets you do crazy shit. Ready for the hottest take? We already know what this looks like. It looks like the internet. It looks like Linux. It looks like Windows and Mac OS to an extent. And it looks a lot more open and a lot more progressive than what we have on mobile right now. I dream of a world where mobile feels accessible to do cool things on. And I'm scared we might never see that world because we have a duopoly of people who just don't care. Apple benefits too greatly from their 30% cut to ever make software distribution easier. Android benefits greatly from having basically no money put into it by Google at all and just slowly languishing and dying. So the likelihood Google does anything that Apple isn't doing first is near zero. It was a joke on the Android team back in the day that the best way to get your good ideas to actually ship an Android was to leak them to Apple, so Apple would add them, and then suddenly Google would give you permission to do it. Android's kind of become a fucking joke, and that sucks because it shouldn't be. It's an open platform. And thankfully, there are still enough devices shipping with open bootloaders that you have a real chance to do something better. What would it look like to rethink the mobile platform to support Android, but to be something else? I don't know, and I'm scared that I never will get to. So hopefully somebody here will be inspired enough to go do it yourself, because now is the chance. Now is the last time. Speaking of things where we might have our last chance right now, I want to complain about Slack a bunch. Oh, Slack. Slack has a real lock-in problem that's going to be really hard to defeat, because Slack's connection system, where I can have a shared channel between two companies, is really powerful. And almost every channel I have in Slack right now is just there so I can talk to another company. But there are so many problems in Slack right now that it feels miserable to use. The lack of inline replies is absurd. You have to do a thread to reply. Threads themselves are pretty bad too, because they just fall back in the history even if they're still active, and finding them is even harder as a result. I can't reply to one message inside of a thread. I have to reply in the thread and maybe manually quote parts myself. Don't get me started on the code blocks and shit. But then we have a new user of Slack where it doesn't work really at all for them. Agents. We have been trying to brute force agents into Slack for a long time, and all it has done, at least in my case, is remind me just how bad of a platform Slack itself is. Slack is built for sending messages, nothing else. It is not meant for reading messages. It's not meant for prioritizing work. It's not meant for getting status updates. It's not meant for using. It's meant for sending. And I dream of a world where that is not the case. I dream of a world where I have a chat app that helps me prioritize what I'm supposed to be doing, that brings up recent things even if they're happening in an old thread, that makes it easier to branch off context, take a sub-comment, and send an agent to go explore it and then come back with feedback. I want infinite nesting. I want threads that make sense. I want replies that make sense. I want agents to be able to come in and be part of the same control plane I'm in a way that is logical. And what I want, and this hurts me, this really hurts me, I want Facebook workplaces. We've all used Facebook at some point. When you make a post on Facebook, it's now there. It could be in a group, it could be on your wall, it could be a lot of different places. You can post on somebody else's wall even. Once that post is there, you can leave top-level comments for things you want to respond to on the immediate post, but you can also nest comments. You can do threading within a given comment on a post on Facebook. You can sub-nest within that too, where if one person leaves a comment saying, hey, I'm not sure about this, and then two people reply with different takes, you can reply to both of them individually without it clogging up the main thread. And most importantly, when someone leaves a comment on an old post, that post gets brought to the top. Why the fuck don't threads work that way in anything else? Why is it that when there's an old thread and I leave a reply in it, the thread stays old unless you happen to have notifications on for it in literally every other app? Facebook Workplaces is the closest thing I've ever seen to a good context management project and product for working with a team on real work. Posts were a much better primitive than Slack messages. The problem is that we have a weird breakdown with chats right now between messages, replies, threads, channels, and companies. And none of those are the right abstraction, and we're stuck fighting them all of the time. I think posts are a much better primitive because they fit somewhere between something like a channel and something like a thread. And then threads are the sub-primitive on a post that makes them very easy to interface with. And not just for humans, for agents too. So why don't I just use Facebook Workplace? It's because they shut it down 2 weeks ago. The one platform that could have done what I wanted doesn't even care enough to keep iterating. They announced that they were ending all development in August of last year. I want this so bad. I want this so bad. I even started building this one myself, but I've been too busy to go anywhere with it. I want something like Slack that feels more like Facebook, that is built to be way easier to interface with agents as well. Now imagine combining this with something like Hermes Agent, where instead of having a bunch of threads spun up inside of Discord that are impossible to manage, still better than doing it in fucking Telegram, by the way. Instead of that, you have an actual content system. You have a group where you post the things you want to work on, and then when your agent replies to the post, it gets bumped back up to the top. So good. And I wish it existed. Apparently, Teams has some of these ideas baked in somewhere, which is cool, but it's also Microsoft Teams, so it'll never be useful. Let's be real. I want this as an open source standard that is easy to adopt and play with, not to replace Slack, but to slowly replace Slack. I have one last thing I have to talk about, and I'll keep this one short. Benchmarks. We need more benchmarks. We need weird benchmarks. We need benchmarks that are written by people other than researchers and labs, because we need better ways to measure the capabilities of models. It's silly, but my stupid skate bench, the benchmark where I measure how well models can name a trick given a description of a skateboard trick, has turned out to be really useful. And a number of researchers and labs have hit me up asking questions because the numbers fascinate them, because it's somewhere between a complex grammar bench, a niche English language bench, and a 3D spatial reasoning bench. And we need more benchmarks. We need people to take the work that they try to use AI for that fails and save it in a reproducible way so they can try it again. We need benchmarks that measure how good agents are at stuff like Git, which CM Griffin just made Gitbench, which I'm really excited about. We need benchmarks that measure everything from weird hypotheses to real work and everything between as well. We need benchmarks that measure how well models can determine what a picture from the sky is of. We need benchmarks that can determine which models are best at diagnosing cancer given random screenshots of random scans that people had done with MRI machines. We need more ways to measure the capabilities of models. We need a lot more of them, and we just don't have enough. Go build some weird benchmarks, especially if you have a problem that agents suck at. Building a benchmark that shows that all agents suck at it is one of the best ways to incentivize the labs to fix it. If you really love an obscure programming language like Crystal or something, and you notice that the models suck at it, make a bench that measures it to show the world and to show the researchers that models are bad at that language. As soon as there's a way they can measure it, they'll go hard to try and ramp up their scores. Go build some benchmarks. You'll be surprised how much you learn and also how valuable those measurements can be. I think I've covered all the random ideas that I really want to will into existence here. I just want these things to happen. And I will give you guys the warning in advance. If you do build one of these things, the chances that I try yours are relatively low. But if you make it successfully enough that I see others using it, that I see my team using it, that I see people talking about it and posting it, I will absolutely hop in to give it a look myself. I want these things to exist way more than I want to build them. And I'm hoping someone else will step up and build a handful of them, even just to push software forward as we challenge more of our existing assumptions about how things are supposed to work. It's time to build bigger stuff, and I hope this helps give you some ideas on cool things to build. And if you have your own different ones, you should go do that instead. The point here is to try and push you to build bigger solutions to harder problems than would have made sense before. So what are you waiting for? Go kick up an agent and try one of these things out. See what you can build. I bet you'll be surprised just how far you can go. I know I have been myself. Go experiment, go build, go challenge things that you didn't think were possible. Go boil the ocean. It's a really fun experience to do. Let me know how it goes. And until next time, peace nerds.